think this one might be a little bit spicy. Ladies and gents, please, if you can settle down now because we've got something very spicy for you. We have Peter Todd defending against Paul Sztorc and the latest attack on Bitcoin with the Grand Emperor of TABConf himself, Michael Tidwell, refereeing this fight. Peter Todd and Paul Sztorc. Gentlemen, your microphones are just beside me.
Okay. I want a clean fight, alright? Verbal only, no physical, no straw manning, no overly steel manning, no manning, no, yeah, you know what I mean.
In my contract, there's supposed to be a cage match with like chairs.
Switch. There's a switch area.
You might be wondering what I'm doing up here. I'm just going to blow my whistle if there's a deadlock in the conversation, which I feel like happens a lot of time with Drivechain conversations. I'm just going to blow this whistle, which means we're screwing up, and we have to figure it out. So I represent a neutral referee.
You represent time. That's not neutral. We all die.
Nice happy talk this afternoon for you all.
Okay. What is Drivechain? Go.
Is this thing on? Hello? Drivechain, the idea basically is to take the unused op-not 5 and use it to count to 13,000. And if you can successfully count to 13,000, the transaction goes through, and if you can't, then it doesn't. And it turns out that in my view, this is the optimal SPV proof, and it allows Bitcoin to travel to other pieces of software, other blockchains, which solves most of our problems.
All right, who's counting?
There's like an integer in the code, and the miners can move the counter up once per block if they wish, or they can ignore it, or they can do other things. But
Hey, I'm sorry, real quick. In order for us to really know the result of this debate, if you don't really care about Drivechain, like you don't really have a strong opinion, keep your hand down. But if you have a really strong opinion in favor of Drivechain and you don't care about doxing yourself, can you raise your hand?
if you didn't read the bit, also raise your hand.
Okay. Now, okay, so we got about 5. Okay, if you are highly against Drivechain, can you raise your hand?
This is good. This is like it's like 5.
So about 6, about 5 or 6. So it's about even. So at the end of this debate, we're going to do a vote again, and I like that it's fairly even, and we're going to see whose heart, if you won there, if Peter's won your heart, or if Paul's won your heart. Okay, so all right, let's go.
And if you become even more confused, we have a third option. You can go to that.
And then the third option is you can raise your hand if you still don't care.
Okay, good.
Okay, continue. Sorry, we're counting to 13,000.
All right, so we're counting 13,000. That's what, 3 months? If
It's supposed to be 13,150, and it's supposed to be 3 months worth of blocks.
Okay, and when do we stop counting?
26,000 blocks, and it times out and dies.
Okay, so who decides what this count means?
The script interpreter will throw an error if you try to withdraw from the coins that are locked behind this op-not. If the counter reaches 13,000, you can withdraw the coins, and if it doesn't, you cannot. So I guess, I don't know, the Bitcoin block validity rules.
Okay, so I think maybe we could go and explain this in a different way. So start with our goal here. You have Bitcoin Highline as an example, right?
I do, yes.
Well, long story short, Bitcoin Highline, roughly speaking, is a set of rules. It's not in Bitcoin right now. We'll probably never get in Bitcoin because we arbitrarily hate you.
Yeah, no, it's also because it's the unnecessary distraction of he actually did me the favor of reviewing it back in 2015. And Bitcoin Hive Mind has all kinds of bizarre experimental state and things that it would never come to Bitcoin by itself. So as a sidechain, it's sort of its only hope.
Alright, so we agree on that part.
Yeah.
But you still want to go try it.
I think it solves other problems as well, but yeah, that was how I first got interested in this topic.
Okay, and the important thing here is, from the point of view of Bitcoin, that you want to denominate the stuff in Bitcoin Hive Mind in Bitcoin. Correct?
It's not merely the denomination. It's like, you know, if you go to an ATM, you wouldn't say like the checking account is denominated in dollars. You put a $20 bill in, it goes up by $20. It really is an abstract dollar. Same way that the Lightning Network is denominated in BTC. It really is redeemable when you move coins into the Lightning Network. You get the one-to-one peg, so to speak, and then when you withdraw them, you get.
With risk, of course, as we all know.
Of course,
when we
yes.
put our money into the fiat bank account, we might get earthquaked.
Yes, there's new risk. It would be a neat trick if you could do the sidechains and they had the exact same security as L1, but I think we both agree that in that case, no, we wouldn't have this problem. We wouldn't have any problems. And
Okay.
so that would be nice, but it's not possible. You have to sacrifice something. And the goal, the design criterion for BIP 300 is that the sacrifice is totally borne by whoever chooses to put the coins in. And the people who do not want to participate do not even notice what is happening. That is the goal.
Well, so let's, I mean, it's always good to think of things that could go wrong. So what's an example where I could go put my money into Bitcoin Hive Mind, and even though I won all the Hive Mind bets or whatever it is, I still lose all my money? How could that happen?
Well, you could lose money by the rules of the sidechain. Of course, you can place a bet and lose. So you could lose within the protocol rules.
Obviously,
Yes.
but I'm a good bettor, so we'll go
So
with that
usually you
one.
win. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, you know that the main. I think it's well known that the main risk of Drivechain is the BIP 300 is that the miners are the ones setting the destination, and the miners are the ones setting the upvote. They count. They're the ones counting the 13,000, and so. They are the ones who can set the withdrawal destination, and they can take all the coins in the this layer 2, which is the main drawback. But I have a lot of arguments for why they probably would not, and if they do, then we're kind of left back where we were today.
So hence the term hash rate escrow, right?
Yes.
That accurately describes what it is. And I'll point out that so Blockstream and the pegged merge mine sidechain thing, they might have been the first people to introduce the idea of hash rate escrow. They had a different take on it.
I got it from them.
Yeah.
I got the SPV proof idea from them, and I just thought, I don't know why I thought hash rate escrow was a better name for the BIP.
How do you use SPV proofs then?
Well, as you know, I kind of use that phrase in kind of a slightly more abstract way than they used it, because in Blockstream's October 2014 paper, what they had in mind was literally you would take on the sidechain like a bunch of headers there and put them into an L1 transaction. You'd see like a kind of a glimpse of the headers of this different blockchain. And that was their version of an SPV proof, but I have a slightly different version, whereas you know I have the work kind of flipped around. I just assume that everything will be merge mined. I assume the set of miners is the same. I assume that what they're doing when they move the, since the same group of people, I assume that when they move the counter up from like 12,999 to 13,000, that they are, in effect, putting the work of finding that block, into the withdrawal that they stand behind.
Wait, so it's the same group of people, but I mean, BIP 301 talks about like blind merge money. I mean, how does this then relate?
Well, I think I'm totally happy to talk about blind merge mining, but I do worry that it gets a little blind merge mining is sort of optional, and it's like you cannot possibly really even enforce sidechain to use blind merge mining. I think everyone would use blind merge mining. I think it's actually not only is it a BIP, but it's also the natural equilibrium outcome of any merge mining, because the miners don't want to pay any costs, and they want as little hassle as possible. So the best thing of all would be for them to not run any sidechain node, and then just partner with someone who is. And BIP 301 makes this trustless, and so I think that blind merge mining is a cool idea, but it's kind of like a cherry on top, or it's kind of like an extra thing, and I'm happy to talk about it, but it does seem to me that people are struggling an awful lot with the counting to 13,000 part.
Well,
so
okay.
I don't know what this means.
Hey, we have people leaving because they're bored.
Yeah.
You gotta
Yeah.
stop with these long responses.
Yeah. So, all right. So, we mentioned blind merge mining. So you're saying that this is trustless for the miner, but the thing that kind of surprises me when I was looking at like bit 301, I don't see any relation to bit 300. I mean, how does this blind merge mining thing relate to the hash rate escrow?
You are correct, it's orthogonal. You could have blind merge mining of an altcoin that's not the hash rate escrow, and you could also have a bit 300 sidechain that does not use blind merge.
Okay, so we have this potential way of doing consensus, but it has nothing to do with who decides who actually gets to take money out of the sidechain.
It's well, there is a relationship. If you use blind merge mining, then you have the same. You know, the layer 1 miners on BTC are the miners of the L2, so they are progressing the L2, so they know the real withdrawal, and they also set the L1 withdrawal, so they know everything.
Now, to be clear, but then you also say, and I think I've heard you say this before, that some, drive chains don't affect Bitcoin mining necessarily.
Okay, I think you're right to point that out, because I think this is kind of like maybe a miscommunication on my part, which is that you and I, we've been in Bitcoin for a long time. We've lived through like the invention.
No one cares about our history.
So like, but it's like many things have happened. The miners have like a list of things they have to do, like buy ASICs and cool the ASICs, find cheap power. So they have a list of things they have to do, and they have money that they earn. And that list has been changing a lot over the last few years, and so it does change further with this, but to me it doesn't really register as like a categorical change.
Well, all right, so let's be clear. So let's suppose Bitcoin Hive Mind gets implemented. Let's suppose, it's quite popular, like $500 million goes on there. How is it that money would be withdrawn from the Bitcoin Hive Mind drive chain without the participation of miners? Because when I go look at bit 300, it seems like I need a majority of hashing power to sign off.
Yeah, you do. And the miners don't need to, what the miners are going to do, the way that bit 300 works is it's the miners are the same people. So that nothing is crossing from L2 to L1, but since the miners will run both, the miners are like the conveyors. I don't know if but to answer your question,
well, so one quick thing. So you said the miners are the same people, but we also then have this blind merge mining idea. I mean,
yes.
How does this fit?
The relationship is that the miners can, the day-to-day of not running the sidechain node, they don't have to run day-to-day, but if there's ever some kind of dispute or problem, they could run the sidechain node. But blind merge mining means that layer 2
So you said day-to-day, they don't have to run it, but if there's some dispute, yet if I want to withdraw money from the Bitcoin Hive Mind drive chain, I have to, in a 6-month period, get 50% of blocks to agree that the withdrawal should happen. I mean, how does this compute with they don't day-to-day have to run the software? I mean, how do
That's
they
a good
know
question, because the way they would know with absolute certainty what the true withdrawal hash is, because this is just one hash every 3 months, is to run the sidechain full node, and that will tell them, okay, for Q3, this is the hash, this is the one withdrawal that's valid for this 3-month period. But they can also learn it in any other way, so they can run the sidechain in SPV mode, or they could just call a friend who's running the node and get it from them. So they have the best of both
miners
worlds.
like call a friend.
No, I'm not. They have the best of both worlds. So they have the option to achieve absolute certainty by running the node themselves, even if they haven't been running one at all for years. They can say, well, it's finally happened, there's finally a dispute. They could then run the node, and because of the way sidechains work, the node may have like UTXO commitments or things it may not need. It's all of its history. So, but the point is, to obtain absolute certainty, they would run the node, but they don't need to. They can learn about it the same way anyone learns about anything. They could just guess, or they could hear about it from someone else.
So you want to, so in my example, say $500 million stored in the Hive Mind chain. Obviously, someone could go create a withdrawal proposal that just steals all the money.
Correct.
And you're expecting this to be based on people potentially just guessing?
No, I don't. I think it's based on self-interest. The security model of BIP300 is that the miners are collecting transaction fees from all these chains in return for basically not doing really any additional work. And so it's a relationship of fear and greed on both sides. So we as the user, we would fear that the miner would steal from us, and we would greedily want the new feature. But the miner side, it actually looks the same way. The miners are thinking, are we going to make, we want all this transaction fee revenue, and they think if we don't get, this money, we will go out of business, and we will, instead of being a profitable business, will be an unprofitable business, and their fear is that they won't be able to entice anyone.
Well, so let's be clear here. So in this, correct me if I'm wrong, but basically the way Drivechain's proposals are right now, you have up to 256 Drivechains.
That's correct.
Now you can imagine a future where fee revenue through blind merge mining is spread across 256 Drivechains. Do you expect me as a miner to nearly every day try to go research yet another proposal to go figure out whether or not this is a fraud attempt or not? This sounds like a lot of work.
No, it's designed to be the reverse because it's the sidechain node that automatically generates only one true withdrawal every 3 months. So it's only 32 bytes every 3 months. I don't really think there'll be 256 sidechains, so there might be. And of course, there could be more. Miners could soft fork BIP 300 A, B, C, D, and they could just keep making more.
But to be clear, when you say one true withdrawal every 3 months,
yes.
Over all the sidechains out there, that means quite frequently, if I'm going to be a miner and not potentially allow theft, I need to go figure out for yet another piece of software what on earth is going on.
It's true that, but I don't see a problem with that at all. In fact, I think it's the enticement of the fees that encourages miners to support the hash rate escrow or the sidechain, as I would see it.
All right, so there's this enticement of fees, but again,
Yes.
we're still creating an enormous amount of work in. Let's give a slightly different example. Let's suppose that we get Stratum V2 working. And as we know, Stratum V2 is meant to allow someone like myself running however many terahash worth of mining on a small scale to actually produce blocks. I might be earning, say, $100 a month producing blocks.
Yeah, but all the Stratum 2 does is allow you to propose the block. The pool can still override you. So I think Stratum 2 is great, but I think it doesn't do anywhere near enough. I also don't think it's a big problem because the pools, in general, they have so little agency that to me they almost don't exist.
Wait. You saying pools don't have agency?
Yeah, I think
in this example, they're the ones who basically gatekeep whether or not money gets stolen.
Well, the reason why I don't agree with that is because it's so slow that it's not as though, sometimes people say, well, why don't you just have a multi-sig with the 4 biggest pools? Isn't it the same thing? But no, it's the 4 biggest pools that have this key and just withdraw, at 3 a.m. and take the money before any of their own clients realize what has happened. So the pools only exist if they are benefiting financially their customers. The customers will switch.
But
If
again,
the
when
pool
you
doesn't
say
do what they
it's
want,
so
they'll
slow,
switch.
when you say it's so slow, remember, it may be slow for an individual drive chain.
Yes.
Yet there may be many of these things we have to go worry with. That's not slow. I have to do a bunch of work every couple of days to quote unquote honestly mine Bitcoin.
Well, I think even, in a situation where the sidechain software has huge blocks and is very difficult to run, and you must catch up months worth of history, it really just doesn't take 3 months to sync, it doesn't take 3 to 6 months to sync a blockchain, so.
I feel like you're setting this up for a haymaker, and I just want to make sure we do like a health check. The people who are following along here, has anyone changed their mind about any of the discussion so far after listening to the conversation so far? Okay.
We got one guy.
We have one person. So I do want to say, I do feel like we're setting up the premise for an epic, an epic tale like we're doing the pre-log, but I would say if you could try to get a little bit more pointed, if that's okay.
Well, I think what we're leading up to pretty quickly is I think we seem to both agree on the fact that with drive chains, if they work the way you expect them to, we're adding a hell of a lot of overhead for miners. The fact is that if I want to go be someone participating in a Stratum V2 pool or something like that as a decentralized miner, I now have far more overhead that I'm meant to go and deal with. And if I fail to deal with that, and a lot of other people fail to deal with that, at best, drive chain coins will just get stuck and it won't be possible to go spend.
I think that's correct, but the reason it doesn't worry me in the slightest is because miners' overhead and fixed costs have skyrocketed ever since Bitcoin has been created. Like I was saying, that, now they have to have ASICs, now they have to have immersion cooling, now they have to have the natural gas credits, etc. And in fact, like I was saying, with blind merge mining being the equilibrium outcome for miners, it's like, this is like open source software that anyone can run. They run the software, and it costs us
Are we
very
sure
low.
Drivechains are going to be open source? I mean, there's obviously nothing you can do in the standards.
That's true. I mean, if they're closed source, well, see, the funny, the amusing thing is, of course, Liquid is closed source until like about a week and a half ago. And of course, you can have, well, one example, a counterexample I would give, has become popular this week, which is the Riot's use of the curtailment credits, where you have basically the government of Texas, or through a proxy of the government of Texas, that is nonprofit, ERCOT. And the government of Texas paying cash to miners not to mine, and not to just to any miner. They only pay to one they have a signed agreement with, Riot. But this is hailed as a good thing, even though if you compare it to running software, and especially with blind merge mining as the equilibrium of them not even running the software, you have all these other people who are actual users who have already run the software, and they just tell the miner, what the hash of the next block is going to be in exchange for
Twitter or something.
Yeah. So
Okay,
I think in that
anyway.
situation, this is whatever other scenario is hailed as a very good thing.
All right.
It's supposed to be
Time.
Look, I think where you're really going with is you expect this to be acceptable because you expect miners to have a lot of overhead. Of course, I may disagree there. I will maybe point out things like, well, I expect miners to run on things like solar power, where I just go mine because I happen to at my house have a bit of extra energy. I mean, if we want Bitcoin to be
the overhead is very low. It's
Hold on, let me finish.
yeah, if we expect Bitcoin to end up with decentralized mining, that's the kind of thing I would expect to happen. Also, of course, to go say that something like, say, immersion cooling represents an overhead, again, I can't agree with that precisely because there are lots of people who do not use that tech. I think we have very strong disagreement on economics here.
I guess so, but I mean, again,
Can you describe the disagreement, because I don't get it.
okay, I think what Peter is saying is that it's not literally mandatory to use immersion cooling. So how is it that I claim that it is a fixed cost of mining? Something like that, right?
Yeah, well, of course, when we say mining, whereas as technical people, what we're really talking about is active creating blocks, not the act of doing hashing. And
yeah, but as you know, I just sort of dispute. I say that the pools don't really have very much agency, and if they construct blocks that are bad, the hashers will point their hash to a different pool because, as we both know, it's very easy to point your hash to a different pool. And it's not as easy for someone who has a pool to.
Because we can all easily run Bitcoin Core. I mean, you're suggesting a future where you could have 200 different pieces of software running and to know if I'm mining quote unquote honestly.
Well, that's kind of, I don't know if I would refer to it that way because we already have merge mining of things like Namecoin. Namecoin merge mining was invented by Sztorc in 2010, and they already, as you know, you have to run the Namecoin software.
To be clear, Namecoin is nearly worthless.
Yeah,
right.
We agree.
Like, we're not talking about something
sense.
that's economically relevant here.
Yeah, but you would agree that even though it's worthless, it demonstrates that classical merge mining cannot be stopped by L1.
Look,
I think you would agree.
It's economically worthless. It's not interesting to go discuss. Anyway, I think something else I want to move on
Well,
to.
can we talk about the overhead though? It's important.
Well, I mean, again,
Whether or not it's a fixed cost, the fixed costs are basically zero for running software, in my view. It's like very cheap because even if you don't literally use blind merge mining, imagine that the software is costing like $10 million a day. The miner is going to think like, well, wait a minute, how is it that I can collect these fees?
To be clear, when you said blind merge mining, we already established that it is not relevant to the question of the really fundamental question of protecting the Bitcoin on the Drivechain.
Yeah, we agree that I think that's interchangeable, but as I also said earlier, not only is it a BIP, and not only is it something that helps miners and full nodes cooperate trustlessly and privately, not only is it that, but I also think it is kind of just a description of the equilibrium outcome of mining. So
again,
it's slightly more than that.
Blind merge mining is not relevant to this discussion of how is it that the coins on the sidechain are protected.
Okay, and I'll explain it without using blind merge mining, the phrase.
Now, I also
But
wanted to
I'm
talk.
saying if the node costs a lot of money to run, a miner will be thinking, well, I like collecting all these fees, but I don't like paying these costs. What can we do to not pay the costs? And then they will, they'll team up, they'll outsource it to the pool, or in the extreme case of this forbidden phrase that I'm not going to say, they'll just call up someone who's already running the node, because of course, remember, each of these, to be a real blockchain network, they must have a bunch of actual full nodes that aren't mining at all. So if you have a full node that you have a bunch of actual end users, people are just running like Zcash, sidechain, the software. These are like what you might call 0% miners. They are
Again,
people who are not mining at all, and they still run the node, so they must exist. So the node cost really does have like a ceiling in practice.
again, we're talking about.
It's from having a $10 million a day node, where people are going to do.
Again, we're talking about a situation here where this easily degrades to you go call a friend and hope they go tell you something. But anyway, I think it would be useful.
I think we're on
Yes,
past
this
this.
is crucial though, because if it does degrade to that, it will only mean that the sidechain developers have done a bad job and then it will fail. So that's a good thing. We want there to be competing pieces of software, and we want some of them to fail. We want people to try very experimental ideas. We do not want people to be
We're
only
hitting.
trying things that are so safe that they have a high chance.
I think we're hitting a semantic deadlock right now, where I think maybe just really concisely phrased, and then we.
Well,
let's just
I thought it would be useful to go move on to the blind merge mining concept, because of course you also have this idea that, and again, I think we've established that there's issues with the hash rate escrow, but secondly, you have this idea of blind merge mining as a way of not having miners involved in the day-to-day consensus. But a problem with it is when you go and say that you have, say, a 3 to 6 month period. Now let's suppose that, again, we have a hive mind Drivechain. There's non-trivial fees generated. Well, if I'm participating in the blind merge mining process as someone who's proposing blocks to be mined, right? That assuming there's someone, something kind of paying me. But if I'm then paying miners with fees to try to convince them to blind merge mine that, I don't get access to those fees for at least another 3 months, assuming everything goes perfectly. So now I have an enormous chunk of money tied up on the promise that maybe in the future Drivechains will go work. This actually sounds quite centralized, because how many people can actually do this?
Well, I think I don't think it has any differential effect on any particular person. So it's no matter who collects the L2 Coinbase fees, whoever does that, it doesn't matter if they are L1 miners or they are people using blind merge mining, or a poor guy or a rich guy or someone in Japan or someone in Europe, it doesn't matter. No matter what, those are coins that have the block maturity period on L2, which is 100 blocks still, and with our examples, and then it has to wait for 3 months to get out. So it's the same disadvantage for everyone. And so it doesn't affect anyone differently.
But hang on, let's be clear about one thing. With blind merge mining, there is a backdoor anyway, and that miners do not need to be blinded. If miners are not blinded to the blind merge mining, there is not this problem with the cost of holding money. You do not need to have this enormous, say, 1,000 Bitcoin reserve to a dual effect. You get paid 3 months, 6 months into the future.
But again, this is not, you're right about that, but to me it is actually a pro, not a con, because what it means is to the miners.
A pro or a con? You said both.
It's a pro and not a con. So it's good because the miners will always be willing to buy the sidechain coins at 99 cents on the dollar, because to them they're equal and they can mark them back over the system. So to me, it is actually a good thing. It means that not only are they worth 99 cents on the dollar for miners, they're worth 99 cents on the dollar for everyone, because this is liquid market.
Of course, there's still this problem that you have all this money going and tied up with this call a friend kind of consensus system.
Yeah, but again, it doesn't rely on call a friend. It just says, you can imagine a world where I force at gunpoint everyone to run a sidechain node. This is like, Luke Dash Jr. world. Or
So you massively increase the block size effectively, but worse.
Well,
Because
it's
now
not-
it's
it's
like
not-
200 different pieces of software.
Because the reason what the block size was about is what the L1 node must do. So that this is no more a block size increase than would be Namecoin or Litecoin or open timestamps.
So you don't think it's critical that mining be something that anyone can easily get into?
Well, just that, think about that ship has, basically completely sailed because of proof of work that, because of the upward difficulty adjustments, that it costs so much money to mine. Like now.
But hang on, that's not a statement that's true though, because with, $1,000 worth of hashing equipment, my percentage relative to like my percentage of hashing power has not changed. Like it used to be, back when I was mining maybe 2012, 2013, you could run P2 pool and you could go make money. And provided we go and fix up some technical problems with P2 pool, we can get the exact same place again, except of course we add, things like Drivechains, which suddenly makes it totally infeasible for me to easily run say P2 pool.
No, I think this is a mistake. Like having huge amounts of fees come from drive chains and come from merge mining or blind merge mining. That is what would re-decentralize mining. But right now,
Why would it decentralize mining if it becomes much more difficult to run a pool?
Because as I've said, I don't see running the software as something that could ever cost a significant amount of money. Whereas something like the Riot curtailment credits is something that is not feasible for like one random guy to do. Although it would be an interesting exercise to find out if it is. If some random guy can just call up the government of Texas and say, I have one S9 or I have one block erupted.
I mean, you realize in that specific example, that is exactly what's being proposed in automated systems, where you can go turn off loads in exchange for money. I mean, this is something that is being proposed. So I think we can move past that example.
Well, I don't know if that, I'm just saying I don't know about what the scale of that is. You have to sign a legal document.
The scale would, is relative to the amount of power you're using. I mean, again, this is a linear thing. This is not an overhead.
Actually superior though, because the running the node is a very small cost that can be reduced to zero with the blind merge mining part.
So again, you say running potentially like 200 different side chains is
Well,
a
it could be
small
more.
cost.
You say 200, it could be any number because they could have side chains of side chains, or they could have you do bit
To be clear, we're talking about your bit as proposed, not some even more complex hypothetical thing. Yeah,
Sure,
the number is 256.
Yes.
Say 200 roughly, right?
Yeah, but miners have a list of things they have to do. I mean, would you say that buying an ASIC is a block size increase?
No, because buying an ASIC is something that's low overhead. Like it's not a fixed overhead no matter how much I go mine. It's a very
exactly what it is. It's a fixed, buying an ASIC is a fixed cost, and then the electricity is the variable cost.
Yeah, I can't agree that's significant. Not in the same way that now I have
Do
to
you really
run
think
a
that there's
whole
going
pile
to
of
be
software.
Do you think there's any software that anyone could write? Though, how much does an S9 even cost? Like thousands and thousands of dollars. How much do you think this software is going to be?
Yeah, bare minimum is quite low to get in. Like this is why so many people use space heaters and stuff like this.
Yeah, but I don't really think there's going to be any software that is going to cost as much as for anyone to create a statistically significant size.
For me to install a piece of software that takes 30 minutes with my billable hour rate is a lot of money. I mean, that's how this stuff works. It's a huge overhead. I mean, that's just reality. Like, people's time is very expensive.
Yeah, but it's not really the point. It's like miners have a whole list of things they're required to do.
Well,
They
yeah,
buy
let's be
ASICs,
clear.
get cheap
You
power.
are happy making that list a lot longer. Do you agree on that?
I think I make the list longer and I make the revenue side much bigger. Like I think it's actually possible that there will be 10,000 times more fees eventually. There's no guarantee, but I think there'll be huge amounts of fees.
Alright guys, look, we got 10 minutes left. We're entering the final round. I know I think the audience is more gassed than us up here. So I need y'all to hit your hard-hitting final points. Peter, maybe you can drive some of this conversation.
Yeah,
Well, I mean,
the whole
I
thing is just that miners may have to spend more money.
Yeah, so let me go give another example, something I'm worried about, given we're kind of running a bit in circles there. Of course, I personally am being sued by Craig Wright in 2 different lawsuits, one of which is to go and seize a whole bunch of money and give it to him. And obviously a problem that you are adding is that now you have all of these coins, if Drivechains are successful, subject to theft by miners. I mean, this does invite legal risks. Do you agree?
No, I don't.
Why not?
Well, I mean, what are they going to do exactly? Like, they're going to say, we sue Foundry and force them to withdraw, try to withdraw the coins a certain way?
Foundry and Antpool
Yeah.
have collectively majority passion power. They absolutely can go and, with
I
their
don't think
proposed
so.
rule.
The only
Why not?
question is, because it's very simple. It's a simple question of, is it in the customer of Foundry, the Foundry's clients, is it in their best interest to steal the coins?
I mean, we can
And
give
if the
them a
answer
split
is
of it.
yes, then the government order is not required.
We can
And
obviously give them a split of it. I mean, after all, in the example where there's $500 million in Highline, we can certainly go and split that 50-50 with the people going in and helping hash.
Yeah, but if it's in their financial best interest, the government order or the lawsuit or whatever is superfluous. And if it's not in their best interest, then they'll get 1/13,000th of the way there, on the end of day one, and then every single miner will point their hash away from Foundry to something else, and the Foundry will be a ghost.
Okay, let's give a different example. What if we do this with a small Drivechain?
Yeah, the ratio of what the miners think they'll be getting in fees versus the total number of coins in the Drivechain at any given moment, that is crucial. That's absolutely crucial. So you're absolutely right about that. But I see it as kind of like, it's like a relationship. Like the miners are thinking, how am I going to get a bunch of fees out of this in the future? I want miners to be very greedy and to think, we need to get everyone using Bitcoin, and we need to have 50 cents from every transaction in the world, and they're thinking like, oh, we're going to make a ton of money. So at first, it would
Let's
be
be
very
clear,
many people.
this is the same argument to go make blocks bigger. We can go make miners
It is
very
similar
greedy.
in that way, but it's not similar in the L1 cost, as you know. You know that it's
I can't agree with you, because it is very important that people be able to run nodes and go and actually mine. Like that is how you keep
But you
Bitcoin's hash
understand-
power decentralized.
But you would agree that BIP300 does not increase the L1 block size.
No, I don't. I agree that hang on.
There's a block
Let
size
me
constant.
finish. I agree, I believe that in these types of failure modes, in practice it does, is to the extent that Drivechains work. And hang on, and to the extent they don't work, of course we've taken on a pile of risk for something that didn't work out. I mean, for instance, why aren't you doing this on Litecoin?
Well, I don't really want Litecoin to succeed, I'm not that interested in Litecoin. But I would be opposed to people doing it on Litecoin, that's fine.
Are you planning to do, are you working with any other coins at all?
No, but there is someone did launch a funny altcoin that is using BIP300. But
What's the name of it?
It's called Sky Doge, but I'm not affiliated with it. But they're very funny and they hang out in a hotel room with it. They have great gifts, I'll tell you that. With lots of like a stealth bomber with a giant Doge face on it. It's like wow.
The great thing about this is if they do launch, you can always just go wait and see if it works. I mean, there's certainly no rush for any of this.
There's certainly no rush. And I find it to be quite a compliment for people to pay so much attention to my idea. And if people say something like, I want more time to think about it, I fully respect that. What I often find to be kind of ridiculous and annoying is people clearly haven't even read the BIP at all, they don't know anything, they haven't been to drivechain.info, they haven't been to the FAQ, and then they start talking about it and say, oh, I don't like it or whatever.
I want to ask a question. You mentioned why not Litecoin, but from what I understand, no altcoins necessarily want Drivechain, necessarily, not even Bitcoin Cash, not Litecoin. None of these coins necessarily want to just say, hey, bring Drivechain here. And then there's also the situation where Paul mentioned, hey, Sky Doge is using Drivechain, but we're talking about potentially networks that have no value compared to Bitcoin. So how could we potentially even have even if we do deploy it on Litecoin or something and it doesn't get exploited or hacked for years, how does that even give us confidence that it would still be okay for Bitcoin?
I mean, it's better than having zero confidence at all.
I mean, we have a play money testnet, which I think that should be enough for if someone thinks that
well, I mean,
code or something.
Everything you describe talks about financial incentives. You can't test this on testnet.
Well, that's also difficult to test on Litecoin, I think, for the same reason. So.
Okay, miner activated software, thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think we have to talk about whether or not it's a block size increase, because I deliberately set out to ensure that it was not. So it's unfortunate to be misunderstood in that way. Because there's no literal, your layer one node, when it runs BIP 300. It only looks at the L1 blockchain. It only looks at messages that are in coin-based transactions on L1. It does not need to look into any other blockchain. And it's the reason miners can steal is because of that. If we made
Hey, real quick, explain why it's an abstract block size increase, because maybe people are confused. You have to explain it because L1 literally isn't getting bigger, so why are you saying it's getting bigger? Explain that.
Well,
because
what
we're
happens?
talking in puzzles, I feel like.
Because what happens is if I want to go participate in mining fully, if I am going to go and participate in any of this in such a way that it works, the fact is I have to go and start either doing this whole call a friend business. Let me explain. Doing this whole call a friend business to go and learn about, or running the software, or doing some other system to go and be able to mine Bitcoin in a way where the drive chains work properly or don't get stolen. I mean, like that is fundamentally why this is analogous to a block size increase. Although I'd argue much worse. At least with a block size increase, you can go use software and throw a cheap hardware at the problem. This is having to go through a whole lot of human labor at the problem, which is a very, very ugly thing to do. We want mining to be simple, based on just running some simple software that doesn't have to change very often. In much the same way, it's like, that is a dream of things like P2 Pool. This is a dream of things like Stratum V2.
Okay, but it's clearly you're defining. But you're defining L1 based on its functions. Agreed? Like you're defining on L1 on like what it should be on like its usefulness or whatever, not like necessarily.
Well, I mean, to keep in mind,
because you're still abstracting.
Hang on. During the block size debate, this argument was made in the exact same way, saying SPV is fine. You do not need to go and validate fully. And I think the problem fundamentally is, what does it take to participate fully in Bitcoin? Part of participating fully in Bitcoin is mining. And you want to go make mining a much more complex thing with a lot more overheads.
It's no different than the right curtailment credits.
I cannot agree.
And there's all kinds of things that miners do that we can't stop them from doing. Like, if you have a swimming pool, you can use the miner to heat your swimming pool, but if you're not rich enough to afford a swimming pool, then you can't. And so there's millions of little cost curves you can draw and say certain things aren't feasible. If miners decide to set all their money on fire, then that's their own weird decision. And if they decide to forego earning some money, then there's no literal requirement at all to do any merge mining in order to run a fully validating L1 node. So the full node cost is the important thing. We do want that to be as low as possible, but miners, there is no sense in which we want mining to be cheap, because every time the difficulty increases, it becomes more expensive to find a block. So if you are against mining becoming more expensive, then you're just against proof of work.
You are
against
talking. You are talking around what I said here. Hang on. You are not talking about overhead here. When you go talk about mining becoming cheap and so on, you're talking about what it takes for a given hash. I'm saying, what does it take to fully participate in mining? What does it take to run a pool? What does it take to solo mine? These are all things where we do not want to.
If you push this argument so far that you include tiny piece of software must be amortized over each hash, then it's not even possible to run Bitcoin Core and be a miner in your view, because there's a fixed cost that's not literally zero.
Doesn't seem like it's such a tiny piece of software. You talk about scaling Bitcoin.
All right. Final thoughts. We're running out of time.
Sidechain. They can run zero if they choose. They don't get the transaction fees unless they use coin.
All right, we're running out of time. I need you to give your final thought. Your final thought. But you can't have your final thoughts at the same time.
Yes, we can. Just talk over each other. It'll be great.
All right.
And then we're gonna have a couple of questions from the audience as well.
Okay, so Walton's got the mic. Raise your hand if you have a question. Sorry guys, y'all are awesome. It's just
Getting my steps in.
other people have questions too.
All right, thank you guys for the very interesting conversation. I sort of think about this in the framework of fees, right? And I've always been worried about fees being too high, which is why I work on Lightning. But a lot of people that support Drivechain are very worried about fees being too low. And obviously we don't want fees too high that things aren't usable, and we don't want fees too low that we have security issues. So is there some sort of metric that the both of you could agree on, where if X, Y, Z happens, indeed fees are too low and that's a concern, something should be done about it.
Well, so I've made the point recently that between the different alternatives of, for instance, just doing a block size increase, or doing a block size increase by having a drive chain, which is meant to be essentially identical to Bitcoin, so you put lightning channels and so on. Between those two things, it is far simpler, cheaper, and less overhead to just have the block size increase. There's a lot less risk, there's no coins being tied up that could be stolen. I mean, between the two, that's actually the thing that gets you something better. Of course, in general, I'm very confident we're not that worried about fees with Lightning because we seem to be really good at scaling it. And like this is like a 10-year time scale thing to worry about.
Just we keep on
So,
short,
yeah.
just so we can get a few
I wrote a whole article
questions.
about your exact question, and you can search security budget, merge mining, merge with coin, and you find it. But look, he's in favor of a block size increase. He hates it, Drivechain so much, he's in favor of block size increase and tail emission, so. Must be pretty bad.
So we have two people, like Walton said, answering questions. Keep it super short so we can get to everyone with questions.
The main question I have is actually, a lot of this discussion has been framed in the sense of you saying, or you, Peter, saying that you're trying to advocate for miners and whether or not they would be able to bear the cost of even participating. And that this should be grounds for not admitting the proposal. Why is it that we believe, that you believe that we have the, that we can speak for them?
Well,
Or
I don't
that we should deny the opportunity to participate.
see. I don't care about speaking for the miners necessarily today. Like if you were talking about that, you would probably go and say, all right, Foundry USA and Antpool, they're obviously the most important miners out there. Let's go see what they say. You know, that's not actually what I care about. I care about how can we go make a Bitcoin where miners in general can participate fully and have a very large number of them. Because after all, Bitcoin right now is
So why don't you set the difficulty to zero then? So minimum difficulty.
Bitcoin right now is
Why would make it very easy to mine?
hang on, listen. Bitcoin right now is fairly busted in that we've wound up with a lot of miner centralization. I certainly don't want to make that problem worse.
How do you
And
measure miner centralization?
I wanna put 30 seconds on the clock, and then we have 30 seconds to get to each
Is
question.
it like number of pools or what? If they all
you use your whistle, it'll be good.
And then yeah, if you're over, okay. So Paul, do you remember the question?
Yeah, it's an excellent question because it's why should we speak for the miners, and also it speaks to a bigger principle of if Peter thinks the miners shouldn't do something and the miners think that they should do something, who do you think is going to ultimately win when the miners wake up at 9 a.m. and work? It's probably them. So but yeah, he's again skirting the reason to care about the long term is the node side, and that is exactly what I have successfully firewalled off, and that is what everyone should focus on, the cost of running node.
Okay, so can everyone hear me? Good. So my question is also for you, Peter, around like it sounded on a similar like vein. You said a lot of the conversation was around an individual being able to fully participate as a miner, if I had like heard and understood you correctly. So I guess to like push on the opposite of that and try to understand what you mean is like, what's bad about me half participating, or just like turning my miner on, not really investigating any of this software, and just like letting the algorithm try to mine it?
Well, so
30 seconds on the clock.
the simple example of how, of course, you can participate the least is you just point your hash power pool. What I want you to be able to do is participate in Bitcoin's consensus. That's an important thing, so that we do not have a very small number of pools able to do things like censor transactions, prevent other miners from getting, and so on. Push came to shove, Foundry and Antpool, in a lot of scenarios, they really could just push every other miner off the network, and that's not what we want.
It was an excellent question. There's nothing wrong with half participating or quarter participating and doing whatever else you feel is the right thing to do. It correctly emphasized that the consensual option to increase the block size is completely different from a mandatory L1 block size that we're all stuck with. So it's the difference between like being force-fed food until you die and eating as much food as you want. It's the difference is consent. And I had other things to say, but I'm going to run out of time. So.
Well, just to piggyback on that, if it's an opt-in BIP, right, miners aren't forced to use it. They would only use it if they were incentivized to. Would you agree with that?
In this case, they really should use it because it's so miner-centric. We need like lots of miners and some users to use it, or it's not, doesn't really make any sense because the BIP is keeping miners on a short leash, and it's also, the whole thing involves miner participation and miner incentives, so it doesn't really make sense unless we have a super majority of miners and some users activating.
To be clear, I mean, the way that the BIP right now has been set up is that unless you get majorities of miners participating in things, really bad things start to go happen. So from that point of view, it's certainly not a consensual opt-in. And the bigger issue, of course, is difficulty. It adjusts. You know, if you are a miner who's much more profitable than me because of something, I'm kind of forced to go do whatever you're doing too. We don't want to do that.
Yeah, so one thing that I'm always really curious about is like, oh, I gotta turn it on.
Hello? Yeah, so one thing I was really curious about that I don't think is being discussed is that the reason why companies like Foundries have gotten so big is because they can do things that aren't even considered in Bitcoin's consensus game theory model. Like for example, borrow a whole bunch of money and cut tons of deals with people, get really good prices on transformers that nobody else can get even access to. Never mind that like a lot of this stuff is in shortage, and that has nothing to do with what kind of code anyone can run.
Well, my answer to that is very simple. Drivechains makes this problem worse. There's no reason why we want to go make these problems worse, rather than at least keep the status quo and try to make things better.
And as you can imagine, I have the opposite view. I think it disproves the fact that such things occur and nothing bad has happened as a result. Like what the bad things that miners can do are like censor transactions or reorg the blockchain. But those things really don't happen at all. And the fact that we have all these weird things happening, such as what that gentleman just described, and nothing bad happens in mining, that proves to me that this whole phenomenon is not really an issue at all. And for Drivechain to make it maybe 1/1,000,000% as worse as the Riot's curtailment credits, doesn't bother me.
Why drivechains? Like why drivechains even relevant when we've got Lightning, things like Fediment, for example?
I think that Lightning and Fediment are not they're comparable. So I think Lightning, Drivechain can solve a lot of problems. We don't have enough time to really explain them all. But I would say number 3 and 4 on my list would be scalability and privacy. So the scalability idea is just what can we give 8 billion people tomorrow that works, that has no onboarding problem and no other like payment failure problem and other things like that. So I think like that is.
Well, you know, that 8 billion example, it's pretty clear that's a massive block size increase, and you get all these problems with running Drivechain nodes. But, you know, more generally, we have a timer for a reason here. You know, more generally, my suspicion is actually that the Drivechain use cases aren't actually that interesting. But, you know, giving him the benefit of the doubt and saying, hey, let's assume this is successful. What does it look like?
I agree with that. So far, most of what we have built has not gotten.
We have another question with that as well.
Hello, yeah, my question is kind of similar. Let's say that Drivechain goes through. Let's say.
Can you step up a little bit? I think we're losing you.
Let's say that the proposal goes through and that a Drivechain launches. It's super successful, and all the liquidity goes there. How does that affect traditional classic Bitcoin?
The traditional what?
The traditional class?
Yeah, like how does that affect the network overall, right? If we have
Not at all. It just looks like money is going into a weird UTXO secured by Opnot 5.
But does that network, that Drivechain, totally different rules and totally different consensus, and wouldn't that effectively fork, kind of like fork Bitcoin in general? Like, wouldn't that effectively fork Bitcoin if all the money floated for some reason?
I don't know. Do you know what he means? I don't think. The money is donated to this UTXO. It would be a different piece of software, but it's the same 21 million coins. On L1, it just looks like 700,000 coins are in some Somebody gets them.
Okay, are we going to try to get one or two more
I
questions?
think 2 more questions.
We'll try to get 2 more
minutes left,
questions.
guys, yeah.
Alright, I'll give a very simple example of how it affects Bitcoin. Like I keep on saying, there's a lot of failure modes which cause problems with Bitcoin. As an example being, you can go with legal threats, go say, hey, let's go seize these coins. You know, and now you have problems with miners who want to do 51% tax to make this work. I mean, there's just a lot of edge cases here. That's a problem.
Let's take the new question.
Yeah, so like you said, like nothing pressing about Drivechains now, but there's like a bunch of different alternatives for accomplishing similar things like in the future. So why, for example, Drivechains over something like a ZK rollup or just something where who's the user of the Drivechain who would not be satisfied with one of these other ones, which would be less contentious and less subject to just specifically miners?
Well, I think that part of the draw is that someone can launch a completely new piece of software without permission from the existing Bitcoin community, and that means you don't have to justify whatever it is you're doing to a bunch of people who haven't looked into it. And so I think that we would have had 119 on a sidechain by now. We would have had ZK Snark privacy on a sidechain by now. We would have had all that stuff years and years ago. And I don't have enough time to already look at that stuff years ago, and so then there'd be just faster
To be clear, I mean, when you say launch it without permission, you've written Drivechains in such a way that you need 90% of miners to go on.
Yeah, permission from the
Hey, we're going to take one last question
Yeah.
also, so it's not, no discussion between you two. Yeah.
Final questions.
Yeah, my question for Peter would be, would you agree that BIP 301 is actually not that contagious because we already have workarounds, like Thompson came up with the thing that it's basically the same thing as BIP 301 and we can already do it today. Also we have merge mining and a couple other consensus mechanisms that you can derive from base chain.
Well, I mean, the simple answer there is I think BIP 301 by itself is just actually not a very interesting thing. I mean, it doesn't actually achieve much, and you know, there's certain technical things about it that I think are very busted and broken. I just don't think it's very relevant. The relevant discussion is what do Drivechains go look like, in particular the hash rate escrows.
I would almost agree because I wrote BIP 301 this was like January 2017 or something. It's very old and a lot of new stuff has been invented by then. I think if it's similar, then why not do it now? So why do it?
Okay. Alrighty. Let's give a round of applause for the gentleman. Okay, and this is the final thing that you need to do. If you are opinionated and you think Drivechain BIP 300 301 is a good idea, can you raise your hand?
Wow.
It's like 20, 25 people maybe.
I count 21 people, or 22 if they. Okay, sorry to dox you. So 22. Okay, put your hands down, and you're not allowed to vote again. Raise your hands if you are anti or against BIP 300 Drivechain.
Yeah, that's like 40 at least. Come on, Tidwell. And there's an extra behind the curtain as well.
Yeah, so roughly about 40. That's a good estimate. Okay, now raise your hand if you still don't care if you're confused. So it's roughly 35. Okay, so those are the stats, and I would say Peter was So congratulations. I don't have any trophy or anything, but you know.
Here, I'll just take your hat. How about that?
Okay. Hey, thank y'all so much for coming. Make sure to read up if you are interested. Make sure to read the bit and do your own research and talk to these guys afterwards.
And let's hear it for this excellent referee to Brandon for TABConf.